Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Paraskevi. I'm a fellow at the Institute for this semester. And when I learned that I could organize an event, I thought of Laure, Schnapper. I've known Laure since 2013. I met her at a funeral. That is true. It happened in Évreux. It was a funeral of my professor, Philippe Gauthier. Laure is his goddaughter. So ever since we kept contact, like I used to see her when I was in Paris, and she visited me in Oxford and in New York. So we kept in contact. It's sort of one friend I have in Paris, and so the her last book is on. Okay, like she's a professor, like I will say what Laure is. She's a professor at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, and she's president at the Institute of the European Institute of Music, of Jewish Music. She is a musicologist, and following the publication of her thesis, having a l'ostinato, she published it, and then she continued publishing on 19th century musical life in France. And in 2000, 11, she published a book on Henry Hertz, or is it earlier? Yeah. And on the musical life in... Okay. And that book was awarded a prize even, le Prix de Muse. And she edited also a book on Fernand Halphen, Jewish composer. And also she created and directed a regimental band during the Great War of 1914. So her latest book is on Isaac Strauss, a ballroom composer and conductor. So that book was awarded the Prix Eugène Carrière from the Académie Française. She will introduce this book tonight. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paraskevi, and thank you for being here, and thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be in this wonderful room. So this evening I would like to introduce this man here. I don't know if you say Isaac. Well, he's the one. Born in 1806, who was... he's now totally forgotten, but he has been very famous since he was the official ballroom director and conductor of the court of Napoleon III, so on whom I wrote a book published 1 year ago. So I will not talk about Johann Strauss, sorry if I deceive some of you, neither father nor son, with whom he has been constantly mixed up, since they composed at the same time the same repertoire, that is to say, ballroom music, mostly quadrilles, waltzes, and polkas. Nowadays, the situation is even worse. Only the Strausses from Vienna are still famous, and so Isaac Strauss's compositions are almost always, I should say, considered as the works of the two Johann, in the libraries and in research. That's why I said I must do something for him. He's even sometimes mixed up with Oscar Strauss, a film music composer of the 20th century, who wrote, for instance, La Ronde from the film from Max Ophuls. And he was also a light music composer. And you know Richard Strauss, which was a serious composer. So one of the reasons why Isaac Strauss has nowadays fallen into oblivion is his name. Only a few people know that he was the great-grandfather, as you said, of Claude Levi-Strauss, the famous anthropologist, who himself was very fond of music. You can find music concepts in the title of his book, a series mythologique. And therefore, he was very proud of having a professional and once famous musician among his ancestors, and he often referred to him. That is why, at the request, I must say, of Monique Lévi-Strauss, his widow, I used a preface. Here you see it. That's the cover of the book. I use a preface of Lévi-Strauss about his great-grandfather as a preface of my book. So some people say, he's dead. How do you have a preface of Lévi-Strauss? Well, his widow wanted really that I published it again because it was forgotten, this preface. So if Isaac Strauss is totally forgotten as a musician, is however known to a few art historians for his collection devoted to Hebraic objects, art or writings, what is now described as Judaica. In fact, during his lifetime, Strauss was not only famous for his Jewish collection, but also more broadly as an art and objects collector. As soon as he could, at latest in the early 1840s, he was then in his 30s, Strauss brought and sold all kinds of objects, such as porcelain, paintings, tapestries, all sorts of furniture, clocks, Catholic Church objects even, and so on. And in March 1845, he already organized a sale which shows his predilection for medieval and Renaissance pieces, plate, enamels, and more. But his real collection, that is to say the part of the objects he did not sell, was his Jewish collection, as the art historian Dominique Jarasset has shown his book. Jarasset, who is specialized in Jewish art, has published several articles showing that Strauss was the first world collector of Judaicas, and that he founded, therefore, this field in art history. Indeed, Strauss wanted to lift a corner of the veil over minority culture, which was little known. That's how he took part at 3 exhibitions in 1874 in favor of the Alsatians, who after the Franco-Prussian War had chosen, like himself, the French citizenship. He then exhibited the 82 Jewish objects he owned at the Paris International Fair at the Trocadero in 1878. And on this occasion, he printed a catalogue at his own expenses with drawings representing each object as well as its description with an explanation of how it was used. You see here a tabernacle, the drawing from the catalogue, and the photo of the objects now in the museum. I'll tell you. The collection aroused such interest that it traveled to London in 1887 as one of the chief attractions of the Great Anglo-Jewish Historical Exhibition at the Albert Hall, an event which led to the founding of Jewish historical societies and museums across Europe. After Strauss' death, 1 year later in 1888, most of his general collection was sold in an auction in Paris for 42,000 francs, but his Jewish collection, containing 130 objects, was preserved thanks to the action of the French Jewish community, which in 1890 convinced Baroness Charlotte Rothschild, James' daughter, and herself an artist who loved music, to buy it for 30,000 francs and donate her purchase to the Cluny Museum of Middle Age in Paris. It was the first time that a Jewish collection was accepted by a French National Museum for public display. Strauss's collection was part of the permanent exhibition in Cluny Museum until World War II. And Claude Levi-Strauss was very proud to visit it as a child on Sundays with his grandmother Leah, one of Isaac Strauss' 5 daughters. So when the Museum of Art and History of Judaism was founded in Paris 20 years ago, in the beautiful 19th century Hôtel de Saint-Aignan, I'm sure you all know this museum, it was the recipient of Strauss' collection from the Museum of Cluny, along with Strauss' archive, 7 boxes containing mostly pieces of his correspondence and music programs, which were, you can imagine, very useful to me. Several items from the Strauss collection can be found today on the first floor of the museum. One of the most significant and most valuable pieces of the whole museum is an exceptional Italian masterpiece of the 16th century. It's an immense holy ark, the cabinet in which the Torah is kept, which is one of the earliest surviving Western holy arks. From the 11 Hanukkah lamps of Strauss's collection is exposed this wonderful German one in silver from the 18th century. I don't tell you what Hanukkah is, you can find that on the web. You can see also a very simple one, also from the Strauss collection in the museum, one of the oldest ever found Hanukkah lamp of the 14th century, like Middle Age, found in France, in Lyon, I think. Strauss also owned smaller objects such as medals or these Italian Jewish wedding rings from the 16th and 17th century, which are also in the museum in Paris. However, if some art historians know the Strauss's collection, they usually have no idea, neither did the director of the museum, that Strauss had been, above all, a musician. He played the violin, and not just any musician. However, being successful as a musician accounts partly for his being able to afford to buy antiques. So I was curious to learn more about his main activity and maybe uncover the connections between his main profession, music, and his hobby, visual art. By the way, the reverse case of Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, who was a painter and played the violin as a hobby. So I would like to outline tonight the steps that led a musician born in 1806 to a poor and traditional Jewish family in Strasbourg to become, after years of hard work, the most successful French ballroom conductor at the service of the French court during 22 years and during the entire Second Empire. Strauss was in charge of what is remembered in their history as the imperial feast, la fête impériale. Napoleon III, having based his politics on pomp, luxury, also asking his ministers to organize brilliant balls. This tireless man died on the 9th August 1888 at the age of 82 after a very busy and active life. When he died, a newspaper gave a portrait of him. So, I quote, "Strauss was a prominent figure of the Parisian life. Almost everyone knew this short, old man displaying a bright and clever gaze behind his eyeglass. His nose, a bit crushed over a mocking mouth, was flanked with 2 white side whiskers." We see them here. Everyone also knew that he had made fortune, that he was polite and mischievous, and that every time he conducted an orchestra, he broke 2 or 3 bows, carried away by the enthusiasm of the waltz. He never lost his Alsatian accent, faithful to this as to his homeland and his convictions, very much attached to the Israelite religion. He remained Bonapartist, forever grateful to the emperor's many acts of generosity. End of quote. Indeed, Isaac Strauss was born in Strasbourg under the name of Emmanuel Israel on June the 2nd, 1806. 2 years later, Napoleon I asked Jews who had become French citizens for the first time in Europe in the wake of the Revolution to choose a proper, regular family name. His parents chose the family name Strauss, not knowing the problems Isaac would have later with this name. And so Emmanuel Israel became Isaac Strauss. He was born in a house which does not exist anymore, but I found an old picture of a house in the same street in Strasbourg, Rue Grande, at the same time, which gives us an idea of what it might have looked like. He was the youngest of 8 children who had survived. As most Jews did, his father had to multiply his businesses in order to survive. He was both a barber, a junk dealer, brocanteur, and he played the violin, the traditional instrument used for dances during weddings and other celebrations in East and Central Europe. Jews often played in Jewish and non-Jewish weddings. Here is a wedding in Alsace in 1861 in a painting from Gustave Briot. You see the 3 musicians at the left, in the left. Jews, like gypsies, with whom they often played, performed music by heart without any scores, and children learned music from their father following oral tradition. Here is a picture of Jews and gypsies in Ukraine in the 1880s. So that's probably how Isaac and his elder brother Moïse, then called Maurice, began to learn how to play the violin. The 2 brothers soon organized a string quartet with 2 other Jewish brothers from Strasbourg, Simon and Solomon Levy, and performed both serious and dance music in café and in private houses, exactly as the young Jacques Offenbach did before leaving Germany. In 1827, they decided to go to Paris to earn their living and tried to make a career. Strauss was hosted in a Jewish Alsatian family, the Schreiber family, which would play a decisive role in the rest of his life since he married their daughter and would work with his brother-in-law. Strauss spent the rest of his life in Paris, but he never forgot where he came from. He returned every year to Strasbourg and composed several pieces linked to his fatherland, such as this waltz from 1850 called Strasbourg, dedicated to his native town, à ma ville natale. Another score is linked to both Alsace and Judaism. He composed around 1852 a Hanukkah polka dedicated to the famous Jewish actress Rachel, coming also from Alsace. And you see a Hanukkah lamp. It's based on the famous tune Maoz Tzur, which is still performed during Hanukkah in the Ashkenazi tradition. And let's try to... So Isaac Strauss is a perfect case study to prove how it became possible for a Jewish musician to make a successful career in Paris after the French Revolution. So his career can be broken down into 6 steps. First steps: To become a professional musician implied entering the conservatoire, founded in 1795 after the French Revolution. When Strauss arrived in Paris in 1827, it was the only music school in Europe which not only was free as a state institution, but also open to both men and women, whatever their religion. Before that, only churches provided music education free of charge, churches being, by definition, close to Jews, who were furthermore not allowed in many countries to become professional musicians. They were excluded from musical guilds, corporations, as we say. Therefore, the Conservatoire offered a new opportunity for Jews, and we find among the first generation of pupils several Jewish siblings, such as the 4 Alcan children, 5 Hertz children, 2 Marx brothers, not the famous other Marx brothers, who were both cellists and members of the Opera House Orchestra in Paris. We also find among the most famous musicians, of course, Fromental Halévy and Jacques Offenbach. Soon after he arrived in Paris, Strauss was admitted in January 1828 in the class of the famous violinist Pierre Baillot, but only a year and a half later he had to leave the conservatoire to earn a living. Just later Offenbach, who was a cellist, did the same. And we enter the second step. Strauss left the conservatoire because he got a position as a violinist at the prestigious Italian theater, where he would stay for the next 15 years. The Italian theater enjoyed the finest of reputations in Paris in the 1830s and 40s. Like the opera and the comic opera theater, it benefited from state subsidies. It had therefore a stable orchestra of around 40 musicians and gathered the best singers at the time, such as La Malibran and Luigi Lablache, for instance. It mostly performed Rossini, who became a close friend of the Strauss family. And Claude Levi-Strauss, so his great-grandson, remembered and wrote, I quote, it's funny, so I quote, "My grandmother," so it was Leah, one of the 5 Strauss daughters, "my grandmother liked to tell that at the age of 7, after having been kissed on the forehead by Rossini, she pledged she'd never wash her face again in order to keep the mark of the divine lips intact." So that was a legend in the family. And at that time, Strauss indeed dedicated one of his waltzes to Rossini. Here we have. However, a position in the Italian theater did not enable a musician to earn his living decently. An average violinist, not a leading one, earned less than 70 francs a month, hardly more than a house builder. As a result, the member of the theater orchestras had to play in other venues, especially when, like Strauss, they had a large family to sustain. As I said, he fathered 5 daughters. Ballroom orchestras were therefore very much appealing and a good way to get extra money, since French people had a passion for dancing. As a British tourist guide wrote in 1839, quote, "Dancing is a favorite amusement with the Parisians, both in winter and summer. And there is no quarter of the capital in which ballrooms adapted to all classes of society are not to be found." There was even what was called a polka mania in the winter 1843-44, as shown in Charles Vernier's series called La Polka Manie, as you say here. It's one of the drawing of the series. It's called An Inconvenient of the Polka. The most select balls took place at the Opera House and at the Opéra Comique, where the carnival masked balls began at midnight and were kept up till daybreak. Gentlemen were allowed to go in plain clothes, female only masked or in costume. Here is the painting of Manet, 1873, at the opera. So, masked ball were a good way to earn money in winter, but the music and socialite season in Paris lasted only 6 months, from October to April. So musicians could go then to London, where the season went on until June, or play in spa towns, the most select and international ones being Baden-Baden, Ems in Germany, and Spa in Belgium. And this is the third step for a musician, spa towns. Strauss and his quartet were hired in the 1830s in Aix-les-Bains, in Savoie. The Savoie and Nizza still belonged then to the Kingdom of Sardinia. And the spa town Aix was visited by the King of Sardinia. It was very chic. This is a ball in Aix-les-Bains. That's how Strauss got his first crucial appointment. In 1842, he was in charge of the balls held for the wedding of the King of Savoie, son, the Duke of Savoie, future Victor Emmanuel II, future King of Italy. Strauss hired an orchestra of 115 musicians and conducted in front of the court. By the way, Strauss probably acquired Italian Jewish antiques at that time, and at least built a network among art collectors. A few months before, in January 1842, Strauss had also succeeded to organize and conduct the masked balls at the Opéra Comique. His name appeared in the newspapers, but a problem emerged he would face all his lifetime. He was mixed up with Johann Strauss' father, who had performed in Paris 5 years earlier in 1837 with a great success. That's why Isaac Strauss asked his friend Berlioz, who was in charge of the music column in the leading newspaper Journal des Débats, to write an article to lift the ambiguity. Berlioz undertook then to write a witty article under the title The Strausses, which became so famous that Berlioz published it entirely in a footnote of his memoir, if you can read it in his memoir. And to thank Berlioz in return, Strauss dedicated his waltz, The Diamond, to him, à Monsieur Hector Berlioz. And he also helped Berlioz 2 years later in 1844 to organize a musical celebration at the end of the Festival of Industry. So they were linked together. We are now at the step 4, Vichy. Strauss was now on track to becoming famous in Paris, in Aix-les-Bains, and at the court of Italy. So when King Louis-Philippe decided to develop spa town in France on the model of Spa, Ems, and Baden-Baden, Strauss was chosen to organize and lead the entertainment, what we nowadays call the casino of Vichy. Balls and concerts were a must to attract the rich international clients who would also practice the piano in the Salons during their cure. In 1844, Strauss signed a contract with the government which owned the Vichy waters. During 3 months in the summer, he gave 2 balls on Thursday and Sundays and a concert the other days of the week with a 7-instrument strong orchestra, strings quartet and a contrabass, a flute and a horn. So it looked like that. Strauss was granted a state subsidy and was in charge of adding new buildings. And 2 years later were built new salon and a circular ballroom It's more chic. And the orchestra was increased to 12 musicians. For this job, Strauss had to be both an artist and a businessman. He even decided to bottle Vichy water, helped by his brother-in-law, Salomon Schreiber, who was a salesman running a textile company in Paris. Schreiber understood that Vichy would indeed develop and expand, and over several years, he and Strauss bought as many pieces of land they could in Vichy, which were very cheap at the time. Just remember that before the French Revolution, Jews were not allowed to own land. That was a kind of revenge. So when Napoleon III decided to develop the city in the 1860s, Vichy became very fashionable. Strauss and Schreiber then sold their land and made a significant capital gain in the process. Vichy also made fortune. Thanks to Strauss's musical action, the number of clients constantly increased. Strauss had even a house built for himself in Vichy in 1858, which became the most select one at that time. At the time, Strauss looked like that. So the most select one house at that time in Vichy, where he would welcome Napoleon III during his first cures in 1861 and 62. The house is now like that. It's not so. It still exists in Vichy. It's now a restaurant. And you see here Napoleon III on the balcony. He filled his living room with works of art that he sometimes sold to the spa clients. You see here the living room of the villa with a ceiling painted by Jouvenet. Jouvenet was the official painter of Louis XIV. And you see also an upright piano on the right. And when he bought his house, Strauss printed a list of the furniture and the paintings. You have the list here. Step 5, the official ballroom conductor. Once in Vichy, Strauss had a string of successful achievements. In 1847, he was appointed music manager of the royal double wedding held in Madrid. Queen Elizabeth II of Spain married her cousin the same day as her sister, Donna Luisa, who married the Duke of Montpensier, the youngest son of Louis Philippe, King of France. So we call that a double wedding. And during this event, Strauss met someone soon to become famous, Eugenia von Montijo, who became 6 years later the French Empress. A few months later, in December 1847, exactly 20 years after he had settled down in Paris, Strauss succeeded Jean-Baptiste Tolbeck as the manager of the official court balls. But only 2 months later, the 1848 revolution put an end to Louis Philippe's reign. Fortunately, Strauss was commissioned by the new authorities to organize the musical celebration of the new republic in Versailles. And then the new president, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, kept him as the manager of his court balls at the Élysée Palace. When he became emperor, Strauss continued to organize the official balls in the Tuileries Palace during almost 20 years, until he resigned in December 1869 at the age of 66, right before the fall of the regime because of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. So Strauss has been responsible for the court balls during exactly 22 years, from December 1847 to December 1869. As you can easily imagine, he was not really unknown at that time. Each official balls in the Tuileries Palace began with, you see here the people who are entering for the ball, official ball in the Tuileries organized by Napoleon III. It began with a quadrille d'honneur or quadrille impériale, imperial quadrille. Quadrille was a kind of square dance in which the emperor, you see him somewhere, and the empress invited the important political figures, for instance, such as a British ambassador. Where is he? Can't find him. Another pictures, you can see here the orchestra on the right, up. Since Strauss was in charge of most of the official festivities, many of his compositions are linked to political events and are dedicated to European royal family members and politicians. He composed the Imperial March that was performed upon the entering of the monarchs. Here the cover, and we'll... Typical march. Among many other festivities, Strauss played at the Château de Versailles when a ball and a dinner was given in honor of Queen Victoria, you see here, during her official visit in 1855. She was invited by Napoleon III during the International Fair, and a fabulous ball took place on the 25th August 1855 in the Glass Gallery. At the center in the pink dress is Princess Mathilde, cousin of Napoleon III, dancing a quadrille with Prince Albert. Behind, Queen Victoria has a white dress with a blue sash, and Empress Eugenie is seated behind. She was pregnant, so she couldn't dance. So, last step, step 6, the opera masked balls. Strauss reached the acme of his career in 1854, when Napoleon III decided to take up the opera house. He put on the market the famous opera masked ball, a long tradition as old as Louis XIV's reign, which gathered until 5,000 people. So this is a waltz Strauss wrote for Victoria and Prince Albert that he played for the ball. So here you see the opera masked ball, which gathered, as you see, many people. A deal was made with Strauss, who offered to rent the house for 40,000 francs a year, and he became both the manager at his own risks and the conductor of the opera Masked Ball, succeeding the famous Philippe Musard, who had conducted them for more than 20 years. Strauss hired a 150 musician strong orchestra, the biggest in Paris at the time, and conducted it during 18 years until 1872, just in time. A year later, the opera house, which was still Rue Le Pelletier, completely burnt down. The balls were held on Saturdays between Christmas and Easter during Carnival, spanning from midnight to dawn. Strauss composed and arranged into polkas, waltzes, and quadrilles the successful operas, comic operas, and opera buffa of the time, above all Offenbach works. Quadrilles were made of 5 dance figures, Pantalon et l'été, la poule, la pastourelle, et le galop. Each of these 5 figures based on a different opera tune. Nobody knows now that the famous quadrille from Offenbach's Orpheus in the Underworld, Orpheus Enfer, which is still used and played all over the world for French cancan, is an orchestral arrangement made by Isaac Strauss for the opera balls. So, being in charge of the opera balls, he dedicated his compositions to members of the high and political society who were flattered to see their names printed on the front page of the piano scores. The Strauss archives are full of letters from duchesses, marquises, where they voices how flattered and grateful they were. His art collection was yet another device to socialize with the high society. He established relations with artists and personalities who wanted to behold his collection, such as James Pradier, the sculptor who made his portrait in a medallion, or the Paris archbishop who wanted to see the Catholic religious objects of his collection. He also sold a painting to Gustave Rothschild in the 1860s, and offered to sell vases to Napoleon III in the early 50s. When Strauss composed in 1963 a waltz called La Source, hommage à Monsieur Ingres, as you see here, he received from Ingres an engraving from his painting La Source, and a letter I found in the archive, letter from Ingres to Strauss. Strauss was also in touch with several famous collectors. He dedicated a series of dances to 6 prominent art collectors who took part to an exhibition held in the Palais de l'Industrie in Paris in 1965 under the title 6 Souvenirs du Musée rétrospectif des Beaux-Arts. Among them, a waltz is dedicated to the British Lord Hertford, that you maybe know. He was one of the main European art collectors who spent most of his time in Paris, and you know maybe the Wallace collection in London, so he's the one. And when he retired, when Strauss retired from the court in December 1969, very timely decision again, only a few months before the 1870 defeat, Strauss was awarded the Légion d'honneur, and you can see the red distinguishing mark of the Légion d'honneur on his portrait. Now in Vichy, you see it he was very proud of it. And only the mention of his Légion d'honneur is carved on his grave, which shows how important it was for him, who had begun as a poor Jew from Strasbourg to receive honors from the highest authorities of the state, and above all, to be recognized for his contribution, artistic contribution, to the French society. So you see, Isaac Strauss, chevalier de la Légion d'honneur, né à Strasbourg, décédé à Paris le 9 août 1888 à l'âge de 82 ans. Thank you for listening.
Very, very interesting. You know, I haven't read the book. I'm planning to. But I found this like biography in a way, but integrated in the general developments of what happens in the 19th century under the Second Empire. Very interesting. How characteristic or how exceptional was Strauss? Is he the exception, or is there a category of, let's say, people with Jewish profile, origin in the Second Empire in the 19th century? Is it possible to ask this question and try to answer it?
Yes, I have a specialty of a Jewish musician now. It's my second book. First book was on Henry Hertz, who was a German Jew who came to Paris also to enter the conservatoire, because in Germany he couldn't go to a conservatoire. So Paris attracted many Jews, as I said. But only few have reached such a career. Henry Hertz was one of them. He created a piano house manufacture, as you say, and he was very famous at his time as a virtuoso before Chopin arrived, and then Chopin was the famous, but before Chopin it was Hertz. So Hertz was a pianist, so he succeeded as a pianist, and then piano, as you say, maker. And another way is Strauss. He was a violinist, not a pianist. But he had to do something else, like Hertz had to sell pianos in order to become some. And he became famous, and he could make a career by conducting and having ball as a ball conductor and organizing, not only conducting, but he had to hire to hire the orchestra to find the musicians. He had his own orchestra, and he composed for the repertoire for the orchestra. So he had many things to do. Your question was so there are a few examples like that.
Yeah.
And just it's funny because yesterday I received a message from I have connection in the dance area. Many the people who like the book are mostly dancers, people who are interested in historical dances, as we say. They were very interested by the book, so I have connection with someone who is dancing this, and he wrote to me yesterday and said, "I found someone who is Isaac Marx, who was also another ball conductor of Valentino. It was another ball room, Concert Valentino." And he said, "You see, another Jewish another Jewish ball conductor. So they were. It was a good way for Jews, for musicians, Jewish musicians
to integrate.
To make a living and to a career. But he was the only one who had such a career. He was the one at the court, and there were many others, but not so successful as he was.
Yeah, but they were not only Jewish people. There were other, like
of course, they were not all Jewish, but there is a, as you say, surreprésentation. How do you say that?
Yeah, of overrepresentation. I don't know.
Of Jews in those careers.
In music, in careers
no, in this management, you have
like an enterprise and art.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a very interesting. And also, this is like I was fascinated. I knew vaguely things about this period. There are a lot of events like that, like ballroom dances, and especially under the emperor, under the Napoleon III.
French people, but not only French people. In England, also the scan in Vienna, of course, but in France, they loved dancing.
So it's a very characteristic of the era of the like mid-19th.
All the 19th century, I think, from the 1830s until World War One.
Why?
Why? Why not?
But like I don't know. It's like I don't know if it's. How can I say?
There was no cinema, so you had to.
Yes, but I don't know.
It was an amusement,
like last week or 2 weeks ago, we've heard Anna Maria presenting something about the commune. It was rather artistic, and the commune events come at the end, or it's part of that landscape also. It's like La Commune de Paris. Yeah, so it's like it was like one, but how these two
Strauss during the Commune, Strauss was there.
Yeah, that's what like 1871 or 2. It was.
He resigned in 72 from the opera.
So Commune happens in 1870 or something.
Yes, 1870 was a bit the end of the l'âge d'or, golden age of these balls.
I find it interesting that this, how can I say, this landscape you showed us that is the decibel are very high. You mentioned an orchestra of 150 musicians.
But you need the opera was very big, so there was no sono like now. So you had to
be loud.
You had to be loud because when you are dancing, it makes.
I imagine
you can
5,000 people
dancing on wood
in an orchestra that
so
plays.
You had to, and he tried 200 musicians, but it was too expensive because it was c'était une entreprise, an enterprise. So he had to earn money, and you have to pay. So he couldn't do more than 150.
Okay, it's already.
Otherwise, bankrupt.
It's already a limit. I find interesting that this landscape, like in a way, coexists with another category of population who is a bit different. I find fascinating as a sort of, but I don't know, more than the observation. I cannot. I don't know. Any questions from?
So thank you for your presentation. So the first question, like, did he conduct it while playing violin, or did he conduct it like with baguette?
This is a very good question, because I ask myself. In some texts, I see he conducted with a bow,
while still playing. Like
no, he was not playing.
He was not playing.
He was not playing. But he conducted with a bow.
Okay.
Without playing. And in other texts, I find that he had a baton. I don't know baton. So it's and I have drawings caricatures. And you see him with a baton. So I don't know exactly.
So like during the balls, he was like more like a conductor and composer than a violinist.
When you have 150 musicians, you can't just play. Johann Strauss in Vienna, he played because he had only 15 musicians or so. So he used to play. But when you have a huge orchestra, you can't. But he was, because he was also conducting the dancers. The musicians were in his back, and the dancers were in front. You are the dancers, and the orchestra is here. And they were in his back because he had to do the coordination between dancers and orchestras.
Okay.
He didn't play.
Okay, thank you. And the second one, like, do we have his music published or recorded? Like, or do you have like some manuscripts available?
There, many of his compositions. I forgot to say, he wrote about 500 dances. So it's a huge repertoire, because he had. In that time, people wanted new music. So in each ball, he had to bring some new dancers, so that's why you have 500, because he was very busy. And these 500 are published for piano, as I show you, for piano, so the people could at home play. And some of them are printed for orchestras. For orchestra, we have the different parts, but few of them, because it was very expensive to be published. And we have a few manuscripts, but not many. Sketches. He had a cahier, a book with sketches. So we know that he composed at the piano. You see that, and then il a orchestré. Instrumentalized. I don't know how to say.
Okay, thank you.
And I was wondering, you showed us a few scores, and on these scores, I think that Isaac Strauss's first name was not mentioned. There was just Strauss.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, did the publishers actually encourage or maintain the misunderstanding?
No. In fact, at the time, to make the difference between Johann Strauss and Strauss, the publisher decided he was Strauss without first name, and the same publisher, Eugel, Eugel, the publisher, published also Johann Strauss. So when it was Johann Strauss, he wrote Johann Strauss from Vienna. And when it was only Strauss, without any, it was the French Strauss. So that's how he made the difference. And you know that it is our Strauss, our French Strauss. It's only Strauss. And sometimes Strauss, directeur des bals de l'opéra, or with his titles, directeur de la cour, directeur des bals de la cour, directeur. So you know it's the French one. And otherwise it's written from Vienna. Johann, écrit en toutes lettres, Johann Strauss de Vienne.
He seemed not happy that he had this homonymy with. That's why he asked Berlioz to write this.
Yes, because when he became famous in 42, Johann Strauss' father was already famous in Paris. That's because he came 5 years ago. So he had to say, I'm not the same.
Yes, but initially might be an advantage for him to have the same name.
That's what people said, but I'm not. Some people, they accused him of having chosen this name to be famous, to get famous. He had many, and that's why also the first chapter of my book, I have made research to show that it was not the case. It was in Strasbourg. The family came to the mairie to write. I found the 5 names of the 5 children in 1806. So. But he was accused of having...
Not choosing the name, but in a way, the homonymy was not even... He didn't choose the homonymy, but it worked a little bit, could work a little bit to his advantage, initially.
Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't know.
I'm not saying that.
And what was difficult that he was called Isaac with the E, I in English. And Johann is c'est un J, un J. So and it looks the same on the. That's why he put off the I and called him Strauss without any. So to make the difference between I and J.
And also it's a bit tricky, you know. I'm the Strauss, you know. Like, I don't know.
In France, it was the French. The French editor, publisher, who chose this solution. Yeah. But still, there are still problems now in the libraries. And at la Bibliothèque Nationale de France, BNF, I write them every week and say, no, it's not Johann, it's Isaac. And
it's quite a common name, though, isn't it?
Strauss?
Strauss, isn't it? Yeah, relative.
Among musicians, yes. At least. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.